have a question then for the Ag Commissioner's office. And Mr. Eisensee, I read the narrative of your letter with respect to incidental use as not necessarily having to be related to the ag use on site. But on page 2 of your letter, on your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points, you said that Ag Policy 6 does the following things and ensure that these facilities are beneficial to ag industry, beneficial to farm operators, et cetera, and you have 2 separate bullet points. Clearly incidental to the primary agricultural use of the site, clearly secondary to the primary agricultural use of the site. Now you have that as 2 separate bullet points, as if being secondary to the primary ag use of the site is different from being incidental to the primary ag use of the site. So what thought are you trying to convey in pulling out those 2 separate bullet points under what AGP 6 is intended to achieve?
In terms of how our office, again, Mike Eisensee, Ag Commissioner's office, the idea of incidental, how we have interpreted it since the adoption of the ordinance, is that you have a primary agricultural use, which is either ag processing or a crop, some kind of production, crop or animal. And when you're requesting an accessory use, it is secondary if you meet the primary standard. So the term secondary really, in our estimation, only means that you have a primary use. So by nature, the visitor use, the associated visitor use is secondary. The incidental nature goes to a size and scale, size, scope, scale, frequency. That is how we've always looked at it. We haven't looked at it as being related, but I do think you bring up a somewhat important point because, I mean, that's our line, but we're not talking about used car lots. So the relationship, I think there is some form of relationship, but we don't like talking about it because we wouldn't say that a used car lot can be incidental to your primary ag use, even though it brings visitors, customers to your site to buy them. That's an unrelated use. We have, by way of comparison, I know that we've had a proposal at one time to have a carousel out in ag land, and we said, no, that's not an incidental use. So I think there's a tenuous relationship. And in looking at the winery standards and adoption, there was a discussion and there was a continuum that was developed that said vineyards, clearly an agricultural use. Processing, clearly an agricultural use because you need to process your grapes into wine. Then it got into a tasting room, that's direct marketing, you're selling your product that you've made. So the next most closely related, and it went down a continuum into offices and into having a sales area where you're selling other items, not wine related, events, restaurants. And an argument was made that all of those are related at that time. I wasn't present, but the argument was made, all of those are related, but the relationship becomes somewhat more tenuous every step of the way. And at some point you fall off of that there is no real relationship anymore.
And you would not be comfortable falling off that particular cliff of no relationship whatsoever to the ag use on the site?
Correct.
Okay.
But I think, again, fair-minded individuals will disagree as to where that is.
Well, I would propose that the way a fair-minded individual could reach a conclusion as to where that is by proceeding in the discussion with the acknowledgement that there needs to be some connection to the ag use on site. Now, you can kind of stretch that to include, restaurants that sell the wine that you produce on the site, but you at least need to make that analytical bridge. And I'm comfortable with that.
Here's where we're talking about future stuff. We're not talking about the changing to the policy, and that is a discussion that should happen at the board level or back at our level when they send our future events thing to us, but I think at this point, we got at least 4-1 where we're at, and let's move on.
Okay, I get that,
Yeah.
but I want to point out that we are discussing how we feel the current ordinance should be interpreted.
And that is the way I think it should be interpreted, in the sense that that is, without an actual policy change, I think that
Okay.
that's about as far as you can get with that language.
Yeah, and just to weigh in, that's exactly the way Mr. Eisensee explained his view of that, as separate bullets there, and they are different words, but, you know, that secondary is because there's
Okay.
a primary, and incidental is then using that kind of size
And
and
Okay.
scale.
I think our
That's
discussion has
fine.
been sufficient
I
enough to
agree.
give the board and staff an idea about where those things are, and that will be useful for the future.
Great, and so, my last question before we leave this point is, who should determine what is secondary and incidental to the prime ag use on the site? Who makes that determination? Should that be the planning staff, the ag commissioner staff, the hearing officer? Who should make that determination about what is secondary and incidental?
Isn't that what ALAB did? Is they not only talked about primary, but they talked about it in terms of secondary, and doesn't that bring into
They did,
discussion our next question?
and we need to talk about whether or not we want to go with the ALAB standards on secondary and incidental.
And doesn't that go into our next?
Actually, I'm not sure they
Yeah.
went that far. Karen, can you clarify that?
Yeah, and Mike can clarify, but I don't believe the A-Lab got into the discussions of the secondary and incidental. The ag department's using the 5%.
I stand corrected.
And 10% for smaller parcels, and planning staff has a real problem with that specifically for temporary events.
So I stand corrected, it wasn't ALAB, it was the ag commissioner's determination about what constitutes secondary.
Actually, Mike Eisensee, Ag Department, that was part of our discussion at ALAB, and the motion that was passed by ALAB included both the evaluation of a primary ag use and this secondary and incidental piece of the 5% up to 5 acres.
Well, then, for
Because isn't-
consistency's sake, I propose that we go with the ag commissioner / ALAB
Because
determination.
and doesn't that go straight to the next point we were supposed to talk about, in terms of that was one of the disagreements between planning and ag, is that ag talked about driveway enlargements, those kinds of things as being part of that calculation, and planning did not, and so
That gets us into the
Yeah,
grading and construction definition.
Yeah.
Actually, what the issue was whether you use the existing width of the driveway and count it,
Right.
or
Right.
the additional part that you have to put on to meet CDF standards.
Okay, so that's the next
That's
question.
been
So
a
let's
point,
just-
that's been a difference of opinion
Right,
between our
Right,
two.
So
right, so
that-
let's just finish this one and go there. So I think we're all nodding agreement then, that standard would, be the reasonable
That
sort of
the ag
applied
commissioner, ALAB determination of secondary and incidental should govern.
Yeah,
the
I
determination.
think that's what we're hearing.
Okay.
Everybody nodding there? Or not, Mr. Commissioner White?
Commissioner White is not a happy commissioner.
Well-
But he's being a good sport.
I'm trying to be a good sport. I was searching through Mr. Eisensee's letter here from the Ag Commissioner, and at one point I thought I read where it was intentionally left vague so that there would be flexibility. And I'm trying to find that, but I can't seem to locate it at this time. But the last paragraph, or last sentence of the letter does say, "We would be happy to meet with the staff from the Department of Planning and Building to develop a standardized criteria and approach to be utilized by both departments to make the secondary and incidental determinations." So it sounds like that's still ongoing negotiations. So
Well, so I don't think we're suggesting that isn't a policy that couldn't be changed or refined. We're just suggesting that right now, as far as the interpretation goes of what we're doing until something else happens, using this is what we've got, and a consistent, clear.
I know we're trying to move this along, but I keep going back to the same old thing. I'm in agreement with the staff report and the staff's recommended recommendations to the board. I don't think the planning staff has been irresponsible. We heard about all the scrutinization. No, I mean, I don't think we have a problem out there with things as they are currently happening. And if we want to change policy, I would think that would be more for the board to give some more direction on.